catch my breath first. Good morning to everyone in the room, online. As introduced, my name is Molehe Wesi. I am the current Chief Executive Officer of ZAIGF. And of course, one has to acknowledge in our list the presence of the Director General of the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, my board chairperson, chairperson of the South African Internet Governance Forum, Multi-Stakeholder Committee, and all the members from the committee, the various CEOs here, and those that are representing the CEOs. Furthermore, I have to acknowledge a special shout out to my counterparts there, from ZAIGF, DNS. Also, one has to acknowledge those from the civil society, private sector, representing small media enterprises. You are all welcome to the session. I think, if you don't mind, I'll call you colleagues. Colleagues, this particular forum is quite unique and interesting in a sense that we are going to discuss something that not a lot of South Africans have an interest or a vested interest in, but they should be. In fact, one to quote a private conversation I've had with someone when we talk about the internet. When I introduce myself, I have to overly explain what exactly do I do. They still don't understand that there is a regulator within the DNS space. And also one has to explain what DNS, but simply put, one gets to be asked, why bother about something that works? And this is the internet. And in that statement, there's something quite profound. It shows both a lack of understanding of the power of the resources that we have a privilege of overseeing, and also the ignorance, for a lack of a better word. The power in a sense that people use it for connecting, meaning that it extends your reach in terms of your social life. Some people use it to conduct business. Some people just use it as a tool of leisure, for lack of a better phrase. Now, when it comes to the ignorance part, it's quite interesting to understand that I, as Molehe Wesi from the city of Johannesburg, my experiences with the internet connectivity, accessibility is far more different than Molehe Wesi from Mozitabo in the Free State. Because there they rely mainly on cell phones, getting data. Here I have fiber. I have seamless connectivity, and I believe everyone in this room is enjoying the pleasures of free Wi-Fi, big quotation marks. So meaning that these experiences need to be the same. That's why we are all here. That's why we are engaged. We're going to engage in the next 2 days to find meaningful ways on how we can influence policies. We can change government and its agents' direction in terms of how they provide this key resource. Most importantly for me is how do we now set up policies which are inclusive of everyone? When I say everyone, I mean everyone. Starting with, a simple man in the streets of Soweto, an exec in a boardroom in Sante. How do we now collaborate and ensure that there's inclusivity and meaningful inclusion? And what is meaningful is to say, I, for one, my needs are catered by this particular resource. I, for one, have meaningful and my rights are protected when I'm online. I, for one, I know how to use this particular resource to benefit myself, my family, and those that are around. So on that note, colleagues, I would like to, of course, welcome my board chair, the welcome address, and then, of course, followed by the ADG. Thank you.
Colleagues from other entities. As they said, my name is Melissa Mboza. Welcome to the second segment of the South African ITF meeting. We had the initial segment in February of this year, so we thought that it's important to ensure that everybody participates, that try and engage other people so that we reach out as we feel that, you know, the ZAIGF is a multi-stakeholder dialogue forum, so we need to hear voices from different perspectives, from different people, from everyone, from every walk of life. The overarching theme for today is access, accessibility, and digital inclusion. When we speak about access, fundamentally, we are referring to affordable access of data, devices, and quality access to the whole internet. Access, I think, for most of us and for most countries in the world, has been a challenge. And I think it's key to come up with practical solutions of how to try and ensure that everyone has access, despite the area that one could be in, and quality access in that, having the quality speeds to be able to participate in the fourth industrial revolution. I'm not going to delve into the into the details of what I'm talking about, but we have experts in the room who will unpack the things that we're talking about. With regards to accessibility, it's important to ensure that when designing equipment that is meant for people with disabilities, that should be taken into account from the onset. It shouldn't come up as an afterthought, and it shouldn't be that if I am disabled, I have to go out of my way to try and get equipment that is suitable for me. I think it is key for us to ensure that in terms of research and development, we find ways and means to ensure that this is attainable in South Africa. And what I've seen in terms of equipment that is utilized by people with disabilities is that it's prohibitively expensive. And what this means is that it will exclude people with disabilities from participating in the digital society. Lastly, everyone from every walk of life should not be excluded. Digital inclusion dictates that everyone should have the opportunity to participate in the digital economy. Like I said, we are in the fourth industrial revolution. It's not coming, it's here. And if South Africa is to reap the benefits of this era, it is key to ensure that everyone is included, not with just regards to access. I think what's important also is to ensure that people participate actively in policy dialogue. The youth, women, people with disabilities should not be left behind, because people should be able to influence the discussion, should be able to influence policy development, so that their needs, and their requirements are taken into account when people develop policies. But I think my main role here, and one of the other things that this forum here is intended to do just that, to say that what are the people on the ground saying with regard to policy development? What is it that we need to look into in South Africa to ensure that we enhance participation in the digital society? I'm here to introduce the Acting Director General of the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, Ms. Notubela Jordan Dani. Ms. Dani is currently the Acting DG and leading the Department on Digital Transformation Policies and Strategies. She is a seasoned public servant with more than 20 years experience in the public sector, of which 13 in senior management. Ms. Dani has served in several national and international bodies in a number of capacities, amongst others, co-chair of the Universal Postal Union, UPU, Committee on Strategy, chair of the African Telecommunications Union, ART Council, the alternative to the Intergovernmental Assembly, IGA, for the NEPAD ICT program, the chairperson of the DOC Women's Forum, and deputy chair of the South African ICT Forum. She holds a degree in Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Fort Hare, a Bachelor of Arts and Honors in International Relations, Politics, and International Law from Rhodes University. She also holds a certificate in Telecommunication Policy and Regulations Management from the University of Witwatersrand, and Digital Transformation Strategy certificate from the University of Cambridge. Without further ado, colleagues, and also before maybe I call it to the podium, I'd like to apologize for the late start. We had said we started 10. I profusely apologize for that. Ms. Jordan Diani. Thank you.
Who was here who lifted this mic up? Because now you're trying to expose me. Good morning. It's a singular honor for me to be here today. So let me recognize the program director, also the CEO, the chairperson, and all the board members of the .ZAIGF present. The most important, I think, is the ZAIGF committee members who have been steering this. And I'd also like to recognize all the members of the National IGF from all our sectors, as well as ladies and gentlemen, and more importantly again, those who have been participating throughout the week at the School of Governance sessions, because I think that's very important. Before I even begin, just addressing those who were at the School of Governance, I certainly hope, I'm looking there and I'm looking this side, but all those who were there, okay, this might, they were there. All those were there, I really hope that it's not a once-off incident. We need more participation. We need you to come to the table. We need you to be the champions of whatever that you're passionate about, but most certainly we need to ensure about equal access as well as human rights for all. Think about the generations to come. You are capable and you have the opportunity to come. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of addressing you today on behalf of the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, as well as the Deputy Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because they have to be in Parliament to fight for more money for us to drive our programs. But it is a great pleasure for me being here, and as Palisa, the chairperson, has said, I come a long way on these particular issues. And so being with you in terms of this August gathering to engage on the most profound topic of broadening participation and ensuring more people are included online and are also able to benefit on the opportunities presented by the digital economy. This forum is a direct outcome of the World Summit on Information Society, which took place more than 2 decades ago, almost, in 2003 in Geneva, as well in Tunisia, 2005. The theme is even more profound, as today we're basically 16 years since we adopted those WSIS principles, as well as the action plan. And it has been more than 5 years since we reaffirmed our commitment to the Tunis agenda in terms of what they call WSIS plus 10. And as such, we still continue to grapple with issues of digital inclusion. We still are grappling with the issues of the digital divide. We're still grappling with the issues of security online. We're still grappling with issues related to ICT. But we need to understand that ICTs are a catalyst and a game changer. The Internet Governance Forum, more especially, was established as a global multi-stakeholder platform. And you would know that as a country, we really tackled and battled with this. But we've realized that there is no way that you can be successful in any form of a policy implementation without an inclusion of everyone equally in their respective roles and responsibilities. And therefore, we applaud ourselves in ensuring that we continue to facilitate a dialogue on public policy issues related to internet governance in an open and transparent we on? We good. Okay. We seem to be good. I think it's the generator. Yes. It is a challenge amongst many. The engineers who are in the room, they can be and will sort out ESCOM issues, and the rest of us will stay behind. So I just wanted to, let me just quickly, so the South African IGF has proven to be an excellent platform to identify and discuss some of the issues as well as challenges, opportunities of the internet and how we can respond to them. At the UN high-level session in December, the global community recognized the important role of the IGF and renewed then its mandate for a 10-year. I just want to emphasize that we are basically 4 years away from assessing the impact. And I'm not so sure how much we can possibly respond. What is it that we can do in terms of getting everyone access to the internet? What is it that we have done to date in terms of harnessing ICT for development, in terms of bridging the digital divide, as well as reaffirming human rights issues as enshrined in the Vienna Declaration, or lastly, building confidence and security in the use of ICTs. This is not a small task. And for a developing country like ours, we have had many challenges, starting even with the most fundamental problem of ensuring access, accessibility in our own country. We're still grappling with 38% of the global community that is still offline. We need to ensure meaningful participation for all citizens so that we can benefit from it. We agreed at WISIS that on the need to create a people-centered, development-orientated, and inclusive information society. And therefore, the increasing impact of ICTs in our lives has continued unabated, and with it, increasing concerns of widening the digital divide, and in turn, exacerbating the chance between rich and poor, the developed, developing, as well as the least developing countries. ICTs and internet are now a norm of our daily lives, and we live in an information age where then the digital divide affects the sectors of development and also the other sectors in terms of also ensuring employment, addressing issues of education, health, agriculture, and ensuring trade. In some cases, a connected citizen has a substantial advantage over a disconnected citizen. And this we cannot leave as is. For individuals with disability, the division is often even wider, with access to the internet as well as the ICTs is denied regardless of accessibility of movement. And where many of internet-based applications and tools are not designed to satisfy the needs of those with disability. This we need to also address. Another challenge of digital divide is the gender digital divide. I get so passionate about it. Sadly, there are more women than men who remain offline. There are more young girls who do not even know what a laptop, do not have a tool. And what is even more frightening is that what we experience under COVID-19 as well as the lockdown around the world is that the situation worsened with the closing of schools, businesses, and therefore making access to the internet even more out of reach. Digital inclusion is more than just building literacy. It is just about, it's not just about developing or deploying computers into communities, as well as teaching people how to log in, navigate operating systems, browsing the internet, etc. It is about leveraging on the power of the internet and what it can bring for social as well as economic change to communities as well as individuals. Digital inclusion contributes to socioeconomic development of society as a whole. It helps to reduce the division between the rural as well as the urban population. Ladies and gentlemen, the internet remains a key part of the infrastructure in as far as an emerging digital economy is it's being built. Our task of connecting the unconnected remains critical. It is also equally important that our citizens are empowered and are provided with opportunities to create and profit from the digital economy, as well as benefit from enhanced goods and services. At the moment, the internet often seems as a vehicle for the advancement of global internet giants and their products, with limited focus on the diverse needs and interests of the different countries or its people. And some aspects of the internet governance can seemingly and almost submerge within the policy frameworks as well as the business model. We need to find a way to bring the power of the internet as well as the digital economy to all citizens, and at the same time ensure that there are services and opportunities that respond to their needs and aspirations. It is in this regard that as a department we develop the digital economy master plan, and we hope that over the next couple of months we'll be able to engage with all of our society as well as representatives to ensure that everyone is able to benefit from this master plan. South Africa also saw the need in terms of responding to the evolution and also to respond rapidly to the opportunities presented by the fourth industrial revolution in order to propel our economy as well as society. And as we all know that the outcomes of the peaceful states that South Africa will have a global competitiveness, inclusive as well as a shared economy with technological capabilities and production capabilities that is driven by people harnessing the fourth industrial revolution in order to propel the country forward towards social and economic goals. The task therefore facing us as a developing country is growing the complexity as well as the multi ways in recognizing of the transformative impact of the digital economy on people's lives and how societies and economies work, and how government can deliver services, as well as how citizens interact with each other, with government, with private organizations, and how businesses transact with government and also respond through a number of interventions, as well as different levels. I'd like to quickly just touch on some of the programs as well that we also champion as a department, and I'm hoping that they will remain relevant to all of us. Firstly, I think as we all know, we need to close the digital divide. And as such, we have a program that will accelerate digital infrastructure network expansion under the broadband, the SA Connect. One of the reason why is that of January this year, they still remain, there were 38.1 million active internet users. That's about 64%. However, what about the rest of for the 59.63 million South Africans who still remain offline? We have to make sure that we close, and we have to make sure that they also are brought in to participate in the digital infrastructure or in the digital economy. With this paints a far better picture as compared to the rest of Africa, which stands at only 39%, and the challenge remains for those residing in rural as well as remote areas. So as a department, we're accelerating the digital infrastructure network expansion so to ensure that it geographically covers all of South Africa. Let no one be left behind. And the most topical, as you all know, we're licensing the high demand spectrum. The licensing of the high demand spectrum remains critical in terms of broadband connectivity, especially to schools, clinics, hospitals, post offices, in line with our SA Connect policy and broadband initiatives. This will assist to unlock access to some of the populations who are still unconnected and ensure greater participation to the digital. I'm looking forward to when the minister makes an announcement in terms of these ambitious plans, in terms of ensuring that every household in South Africa is covered and actually gets access to the internet. The switch off of analog signal in South Africa set also to ensure that the freed up spectrum is also then being used for various services. And we're working with our regulator, ICASA, to ensure that the spectrum licensing as well as allocation is done speedily. We also had the National ICT Integrated White Paper, which was approved by Cabinet in 2016 and that considered a number of interventions that are necessary to stimulate inclusive growth, access, and ensure that the value chain translates to everyone. It focuses on maintaining an open internet to support the development of a vibrant, inclusive, as well as a local internet economy, as well as community. In order for this to be achieved, ladies and gentlemen, it identifies the need to support the development of local internet-based enterprises while investing in the development of local skills that can drive the development of the internet for the benefit of the country as a whole and those who live in it. I think we have a number of young South Africans around the room and also online who can assist us to ensure that we build our own capabilities in this regard. With regards to another program, I think which is also remains critical is our cybersecurity program that ensures that there's the protection of critical information infrastructure. So we have the cybersecurity framework that measures also in terms of continuous measures in terms of cybersecurity to ensure a secured space, which will encourage wider use of digital platforms. South Africa is one of the major targets for cybercrime. Cyber attacks as well as hacking of systems is becoming more prevalent. This affects both enterprises as well as individuals, and as we continue to experience the exploitation of personal data. According to the recent article in our Daily Maverick this month, South Africa is the third highest number of cybercrime in the world. Third. And this cost about 2.2 billion annually. According to the October 2021 Interpol's Africa Cyber Threat Assessment Report, in the first quarter of this year, South Africa was the worst affected country in the continent in terms of the targeted ransomware attacks which affects critical infrastructure. And we've heard about this. And unfortunately, when it first started, we thought it was going to be a once-off incident, and yet it continues to perpetuate. The most prevalent cases of cyber attacks is on mobile banking. And yet we want to ensure part of our digital inclusion is financial inclusion. And also 219 million email threats were detected. It is critically important that all stakeholders play a responsible role in ensuring that the citizens as well as consumers are able to interact safely online. We cannot promote the internet as well as online services to the whole population and at the same time expose people to the dangers that in some cases they may not be aware of. It is all of us our equal responsibility. We also have other programs which I'll touch on very briefly. The digital skills and future of work program, as well as our data and cloud, because there's a need for us to ensure that we protect our data. We ensure the management of our data as we move towards an open internet as well as the One Africa market under the African Continental Free Trade. So I just want to quickly touch with respect to, and I'm hoping that in the next 2 days, we will unpack it further. With respect to the upcoming global internet governance level, we still need to ensure the following. Governments generally have limited influence on global internet governance issues and are thus not able to fulfill their responsibilities as custodians of public policies in their respective countries, or perhaps then they fail to participate. In addition, smaller countries as well as developing countries tend to have less influence on internet governance issues, even in their respective countries, which is not in keeping with the principles of the multilateral international policy formulation. Private sector businesses interest predominantly based on they predominantly influence, and they are majority in leading in terms of global economies, and they tend to dominate decision making and often limiting the voice of the public policy advocates, including that of government as well as civil society. There is a need to strengthen the democratic decision making as well as the transparency in the global internet governance framework. We must all agree on a common approach for data security breaches. We must also address the issues related to legal as well as human rights matters, especially on these data breaches. We must also address the issues of content management, which needs to be clarified in terms of who's managing this content, where is it being stored, who is responsible or accountable for the unlawful content as well as the breaches. Is it the platform service providers? Is it the developers? Is it the hosting providers? Or is it a joint responsibility? But this global IGF cannot conclude without addressing this issue. We must also address and manage fraudulent conduct, as well as the proliferation of the abuse of the domain name systems, registries, including the IP infringement. And I'll come back on this matter later when we look at the continental. Collectively as Africa, we must stand and fight against the expropriation of IPs, as well as build on our digital economy. We ought to plan to the future. And that future is basically indicated that every computer, every mobile device, every electronic device, every home automation component, in terms of IoT sensors and any other device, should be connected to the internet. And therefore, we will require these IP addresses for the devices to be able to communicate with each other. Our ultimate goal with respect to the international internet governance is to ensure that the internet is governed for the public interest, and that it takes account of the diverse needs of all countries across the world in line with the principles of open internet, as well as the line with the principles of WSIS. At a continental level, the AU recognized the importance of ICTs, and in this regard, as part of the Agenda 2063, we developed a number of blueprints for the sector. Amongst them is the digital transformation strategy for the decade, and the strategy acknowledges that internet is an essential tool and a dynamic force for economic, social, as well as cultural development. It stresses on the need for localizing internet governance. The digital transformation seeks to promote national, regional, as well as intracontinental interconnectivity through the establishment of internet exchange points, including promoting stakeholder support, as well as removing barriers to the entry to IXPs by nurturing the competitiveness of the internet interconnection, as well as in the traffic exchange environment. What I would like to emphasize that it is important that we must collectively, as stakeholders in the governance of the internet, both in South Africa as well as in the region, recognize and defend our successes as Africa, and also to defend the critical infrastructure that we need to have for us to build our digital economy. The protection of critical infrastructure to support Africa's digital economy remains key. In the internet global community, internet IPs is the most important resource used to exchange data traffic. Unfortunately, from an early age of internet, the addresses distributed were biased. In fact, Africa only got 3% of the IPv4 numbers to serve 14% of the global population. Nowadays, even this scarcity allocation has been targeted to be utilized by people outside. And we have not been strong enough to protect or to defend this. AfriNIC has played a significant role in the development of the continent through the allocation of internet resources to African stakeholders. I just want to give this as a background. During the AfriNIC Policy Development Working Group session, and that was in 2011, some of the AfriNIC members proposed policies allowing such scarce resources to be not to be transferred outside of the continent or the region, whilst other policy proposals to audit resource usage according to the membership agreements, and unfortunately, this was badly objected. In the recent years, though, we saw the wrath of this decision as we continue to endure some of the serious challenges which has been caused by which is of significant concern to all of us. The recent court challenges have threatened the critical role of AfriNIC in providing internet resources to meet development aspirations. These events should focus our attention, and we should also look at how to address or how best we can continue to protect and promote our collective interest in the development of internet in the continent. It is important that we recognize and collectively promote the AU Convention on Cybersecurity as well as protection of personal data, which highlights the importance of addressing cybercrime as well as the personal data protection. Ladies and gentlemen, or as I call you, the community that matters. Let me firstly congratulate .ZAIGF as well as the ZAIGF committee for creating this opportunity. The ZAIGF seeks to discuss and debate as well as interrogate existing, new, as well as innovative ways of meeting as well as the access to digital, on digital line, as well as to ensure digital inclusion as we continue to face this challenge. To dispel these myths, and argues of the facts, as well as we must present ideas and challenges as I have, hopefully brought on some of the things for us to actually unpack. I'm hoping that the sessions today as well as tomorrow will ensure and facilitate a dialogue that identifies issues and also then determines the outcomes that are going to be beneficial. And those outcomes must also address the barriers for effective use of ICTs as well as internet for us to build our digital society, inclusive digital society. So as the theme says, access, accessibility, and digital inclusion, along with its many complexities as the CEO alluded in his opening remarks. I'm hoping that the outcome would not only send a message to the region and the continent, but those who will therefore be championing our position in the global IGF, that we would be listened to and they will recognize our needs. I also hope that we'll be able to build more partnerships so that we are able to achieve the goals that we set before us. So without further ado, I would like to wish us all fruitful deliberations. And I look forward in terms of learning from your deliberations, in terms of what it is as government we need to do to assist in ensuring and broadening participation of all, and especially for all South Africans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Me Nonkubela Kiani and Me Palesa, because and Tatemuliki. We take notes from the points that you have made, and we hope that through this discussion, through this forum, we can facilitate that starting point to assessing where we are with the internet. I can guarantee you we have a rich audience, we have a rich stakeholder group, and a rich actors. The questions, the dialogue that's been taking place throughout the school has demonstrated that we are aware of our challenges, but we again are the ones that have the solutions to our challenges. So I really do hope that the dialogue that will take place today will demonstrate that the solutions are in fact in-house. Without wasting any time, I'd like to call on Advocate Zanyiwe Mtatisi Asari, who will be facilitating the first session of the discussion. The session, she will introduce her panel. It's quite a diverse panel as well. And she will introduce the topic. Advocate, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is well. I'm going to ask for a little technical favor. If we could just remove this podium so I could sit with my panel on the chairs, please. Okay, round two. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for coming and participating. A special thank you to the ADG, Ms. Jordan Jani. I'd also like to thank the CEO and the chairperson of ZADNA, but most especially the South African Internet Governance Forum and our committee for all the hard work and for everybody participating. I'm going to call to my panel Mr. Dina Moodley. If you could please join me, and could I please have Ms. Hlengiwe Dube, if you can hear us online, can you please confirm?
Confirmed, yes, I can hear you.
How are you this morning, Hlengiwe?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. We're just going to wait for Mr. Moodley to join us and we'll start. As mentioned earlier on in the beginning of this session today, the internet is seen as a dawn for Africa. The internet and all it offers is seen as an opportunity for Africa to leapfrog and to close the digital divide. But that means social issues being handled, economic disparities being eradicated. When we speak about that, when we have platforms such as these, we are encouraging people to see this as an opportunity. However, as we've developed, we have realized that there are coded biases. We have realized that there are societal issues that have been embedded in this new cyber world that we claim is our second chance or second opportunity to life. This morning, we will have Mr. Dina Moodley and Ms. Hlengiwe Dube present to us from a lived out experience what that means for a person living with disabilities in South Africa and the world at large, and for us to engage, learn something new, and become immersed in becoming part of the solution. To not just say that we're looking at opportunities, but to be honest and earnest in terms of how we'll be utilizing and adopting the internet for an inclusive South Africa for all. Mr. Moodley, I am going to just ask you to briefly introduce yourself and then we'll start with your presentation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to the CEO, the chairperson, and the ADG. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Dina Moodley, and my day-to-day job is access technology specialist for UNISA. But I'm representing Blind SA at this event and the blindness sector, but I will cover all disabilities while I'm here.
Thank you so much for that. And if we could just have Ms. Hlengiwe also just give us a brief on who she is, and then we'll jump into our presentations for the morning.
Hello, everyone. I hope I can be heard. My name is Hlengiwe Dube. I'm with the Center for Human Rights, which is based at the University of Pretoria. So I'm the project manager of the Expression, Information and Digital Rights unit of the center. We work on issues of freedom of expression, access to information, and also the intersection between technology and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll start with your presentation, Mr. Moodley.
Okay. Okay. Now you can see this becomes very, very interesting when you have a disability and you have to hold a mic and then try and read Braille at the same time. Because we were only given two hands. Interestingly enough, I think where we need to start so that all of you get a perspective. The World Health Organization estimates that between 15 and 20% of the world's population have some form of disability. We have a population of almost 8 billion currently, which actually works out to 1 in 7 people. It'd be interesting to know how many people we have here in the audience today. Because if we look at the audience, that means 1 in 7 of you have some form of disability. So that's how prevalent it is. And the disabilities vary, they're different. And two people with the same disability might require totally different needs. And I think it's important to state upfront that there are legislative frameworks around the world. There are standards that are put in place. And the very, very first one, and in a short presentation like this, I cannot cover all of them. So I've just picked highlights from one of them, basically. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Now, this is a document that South Africa ratified and is a signatory to. So that means it should be enforced here in this country. Okay, some of the aspects that we look at is, for instance, discrimination. Okay, now it actually says there should be non-discrimination. But when some of the internet is in, when we look at some of the internet, for instance, there's blatant discrimination. The access to information is not there. You're not able to access that information. So you're being discriminated against. Then we got full and effective participation and inclusion in society. Obviously, if you're excluding me from accessing information, and I will cover this in the next slide. If you do not provide me with the tools, the access, and all the other things that go into using the internet, or and I think we should broaden this to actually look at the Internet of Things, right? Then you are excluding me, and you are not giving me that opportunity to do what I can do best. Accessibility. Now, we talk about accessibility, but there's two parts to this. There's accessibility and usability. Something can be usable, but cannot be accessible, depending on who's using it. Okay, so we need to actually look at those terms and how we define those terms. I come from the education space, and I can tell you now, when COVID hit South Africa last year, there was an absolute outcry by people with disabilities. Because suddenly everyone went online and people with disabilities were left behind because they just didn't have the equipment, they didn't have the know-how, and they weren't able to continue studying, which actually meant that a number of people with disabilities actually dropped out in the last 18 months. And we're trying to actually put that right to try and help them to actually continue. Freedom of expression and opinions and access, okay? So like you would use all your tools like Instagram and Facebook and all these other tools, you know, we should have the ability to be able to use those tools as well. And it comes down to how these tools are actually designed so that you can have access. For instance, you and I go onto a shopping site, an online shopping site, okay? And they put up a picture of a product with all its details in it. Now, for someone like me that's blind, that's no use to me. I cannot read that. So my experience on that shopping site then becomes, well, it's basically what the shop is saying to me is, I don't need your money. Okay, and the last one there is, you know, the South African Constitution does give us rights and gives us various rights. Of course, there's many other legislation out there that we could actually look at. There's a disability white paper and so on that we can actually look at ensuring access. So what are the challenges that people face? That's the next slide. Participation in relevant structures. Okay, you've got the South African Internet Governance Forum. How many people with disabilities do you have on this forum? Have you got people with disabilities talking for themselves? Or are you deciding for them what is best? Are you living in their space to to know what is good for them. And that's why it's important to make sure that you have participation in structures that decide on services and equipment and infrastructure for people with disabilities. The other major factor is the cost factor. Okay? Cost of access technology or assistive technology is extremely, extremely expensive. The equipment is extremely expensive. For instance, this little device that I'm actually reading now, I would say 99% of all people with disabilities will not afford. This thing sells at 120,000 rand. Okay? And it's a Braille note taker, something that all blind and deafblind people need to be able to use. So it shows you, by having devices that expensive, there's no way you're going to open up the internet for people. Access to technology. Now, a lot of the equipment that's manufactured is manufactured in other countries. Bringing it into this country is extremely, extremely expensive. I bought a second device like this secondhand from the United States. Okay? Someone sold it to me for $500 secondhand. It cost me more than $500 to bring it into the country for me to get access. Then, you know, while giving someone assistive technology, there's a huge gap in terms of the training and how they use that technology. Because if you grew up in a rural area that's never seen technology in your life before, you're never going to know how to use it unless someone trains you. And likewise for people with disabilities, that is also a major, major, major factor. The non-compliance to standards. Now there's standards out there all over the world. I mean, there's standards for everything. There's standards for designing web pages and so on. But how many of you actually even know those standards exist? How many of you even use those standards? And how many of you test against those standards? Okay, because if you did it, then a lot of the things would be accessible up front. And you'd make everyone's lives a lot easier. Okay, so in your training programs and in the accreditation and courses and so on that you develop, you know, usability and accessibility should be a core component, a core principle that is laid down, because it's always cheaper to have the access built in from the ground up rather than fitting it after the fact. It's always more expensive to bring it in after the fact. So it's always important to actually make sure that you've got that. The next slide. Possible solutions. To make access technology more affordable. And this could be, you know, we could actually look at medical aids, for instance. Those people that are on medical aids can actually then purchase the equipment like you got in other countries. You could have government sponsors. You could have various other means. And we could even get the financial sector to have some sort of loan scheme that people can then buy equipment and actually pay it off over a number of years. And of course, at either very low interest rates or no interest rates, because these companies make a lot of money anyway. And it's about time that they actually start giving back to the community. Okay. And I think once we've got the the access technology in their hands to make sure that people get trained on these devices so that they can actually use it. It doesn't become a white elephant. It doesn't. And we've seen this happen with a number of people where they get given technology, they don't get trained. So what happens? They just sell it because they don't know the value of that equipment. To ensure legislation is put in place to enforce standards and compliance. Now, in the United States, you've got the ADA, you've got the 508, the federal 508 legislation, which compels you to make everything accessible. In the UK, you've got the ADA, which does the same. In Europe, they've also now got the European Disability Access Act, which comes into effect from 2025, which actually simply says anything sold into the European Union or any services rendered to the European Union must be fully accessible. That means if you run a training organization here and you accept members from the EU by 2025, you must make sure that you are accessible or you can be fined. To ensure that persons with disabilities are part of governance structures. And I think that's important so that they can advocate and tell you what the problems are. To set up an accreditation standards committee to actually look at accrediting companies and various other people that use all this technology to make sure that they follow these standards. And so that you have some sort of rating scheme, which actually then says you've complied to the various different standards. To also set up a body or a committee or structure to assess accessibility, to evaluate accessibility on all South African domains. And this would be even government sites, companies, and various other places. And this should extend to things like mobile devices, Internet of Things, and all these other devices. Because it's nice to have a fridge that tells you what's in it, but if it's not accessible, it doesn't help me, right? But some companies are really doing their bit. You've got people like Apple who have built in universal design principles into their product, so I can pick up an iPhone and just use it. I don't have to pay anything extra for that phone. And if we can get to that point in this country, then we'll be saving a lot of people a lot of problems. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Mudli. That was exceptionally informative. And I think it pinpoints some of the issues that we already face as South Africa at a national level without looking particularly at, whether it's female-based issues, whether it's looking at people living with disabilities. From a blind South Africa SA perspective, would you say that, the education system itself is actually sensitizing people, South African people at large, on what, living with a disability looks like, what it means? And I'm going to explain to you why I'm asking this question. You mentioned something pertinent. You said compliance by design or building in accessibility by design. We don't have a big space for technology manufacturing in the country. We're not doing any of that. How do we as South Africans actually get that from a school level, understanding, embedding the idea of wanting to be our own solution makers? And what is Blind SA actually doing to get that narrative, that discourse out there? And what do we do in this room to actually participate and join in?
Okay, a number of things. Blind SA has been engaging with the banking sector, for instance, because the banking sector brought out all these wonderful mobile apps for you to do your banking. And only 2 of the banking apps are actually accessible. So all the other banks are telling us they don't want our money. Okay. And it's been an ongoing fight with the banking sector to get all of them compliant. That is the one area that we've been doing lots of work with. The other area, we've been starting to bring in low-cost devices that have been made in the developing world and which we are actually making available. A similar device to this, but it's not internet capable, is now selling at about 9,000, opposed to the 120,000. You know, there's also Blind SA just recently took government to court and won the case to have the Copyright Amendment Act declared unconstitutional, because it does not allow for material that has been put into print to be put into other formats for people with disabilities. And the court order has now actually stated that the Constitutional Court must actually rule on it, and also this must be put in place within a year. Okay, so that's some of the areas. There's a lot of other areas that we're actually working on, helping companies to actually try and get accessible. But it's you know, it also depends on the company whether you want that to happen or not.
Thank you so much. I think that from an intellectual property perspective, being able to, like you said, change from one format, ensure that you know, accessibility, dissemination of information, access to that information is something that we vie for. And I really do hope that that Constitutional Court hearing does give us a win. I think that becomes progressive for everybody and has a ripple effect on the economic growth and the development of South Africa as a whole. But what I'm going to do is, before we do get into this, I thought that would be important for us to just ask that question. We're going to ask Ms. Lengiwe Dube to give us a presentation and also her perspective as a program manager at the Center of Human Rights. Ms. Lengiwe, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Good morning, everyone. I hope I can be seen and heard. I've already mentioned that I'm with the Center for Human Rights, which is at the University of Pretoria. So I've been listening to our colleague when he was presenting. I was like, oh, wow, it looks like we are going to be repeating each other. But I guess it's for the purposes of emphasis as well. And it's also a good thing that we were listening to someone who has a lived experience, and which is very important. And when I was thinking of this particular platform, I was asking myself that, you know, besides just including this particular aspect in this program, I don't know, as organizers, what are the steps you have taken to ensure that, you know, persons with disabilities are effectively included, ensuring that there are accessible facilities, or also accessible tools that they may use, and also in the room, as well as our colleague was asking, whether we have enough representation of persons with disabilities in the room. So those are very important issues to just consider in our planning, in our programming, and everything. So, but I'm happy that this panel actually has been included in this program at a time such as this one, and that is really appreciative. And also as the Center for Human Rights, we are very glad to be included in this program, and also amplify our voice and the voices of persons with disabilities in this particular program. So as I just start my presentation, I'm not going to share my screen for the initial presentation, but I hope I'll be able to share the screen. I just want to show a very short video clip at the end of my presentation. I hope that will be possible. So as I just begin this conversation, I came across a quotation by a child from Kenya, and he said that through the computer, I can now use Gmail or SMS to communicate with my mother anytime. I no longer need to ask a teacher to make a phone call for me. So that for me was a very profound statement when we are looking at the subject of the day. And also, according to Judy Human, she said that when we are looking at, she's a disability rights activist, and she says that for us, technology makes things easier. But when you look at a person with a disability, it makes things possible. That also is a very profound statement. And it also emphasizes the point that our colleague has already made, that we can be sitting and using, I can be having a device, but that does not mean that it's user-friendly or it is usable by a person with a disability. But when they actually get the requisite one, then it makes things possible for them. So ideally, when you're looking at the context of the digital age, technology in itself should actually enhance accessibility. But persons with disabilities, they face unique challenges that also compromise their chances, the chances of benefiting from the technology-based society that we find ourselves in right now. And when we look at the population in the world of persons with disabilities, it's quite a big number of people that we are talking about today. And if these are excluded, you can imagine approximately 1 billion or more people that will have been excluded, and which points to the significance of having such a discussion and see how we can make up strategies and also a way forward. So when you look at the internet itself, it actually provides possibilities for everyone, but even more, it provides, it enhances political inclusion, economic inclusion, social inclusion, and also helps in also promoting the rights of persons with disabilities as well. So it is actually a driver of inclusion or a facilitator of inclusion. And based on just these initial remarks, you can actually see how a robust internet governance system or an effective internet or inclusive internet governance system can actually work for persons with disabilities. Looking at the COVID pandemic that we find ourselves in, which was a global, is a global health emergency, which forced us to pivot into digital platforms. You know, we're having our meetings virtually, working from home, remotely, children also learning, learners also learning online, replacing the face-to-face learning mode. And if you look at the pandemic itself and the information regarding the pandemic from whether it's the government or other stakeholders who were providing information to the public, most of this information was shared online. And it means that when this information was shared online, then the question is, were persons with disabilities in a position to also access the information, in the manner that everybody else was accessing it? And did they face challenges around accessing this information? Were they connected enough to be able to benefit from this information that was shared online? Just to touch on the obligations of the states, we have the global instrument, the CRPD, which gives and places an obligation on states to actually undertake research and development and also promote the availability of accessible technologies. It also places an obligation on states to promote, to develop, and to provide access to ICTs, internet, and new technologies to persons with disabilities, and also making them accessible at minimum cost. And also the information that is intended for the public, making sure that it's available in accessible formats and also at little or no cost at all. And in the African continent, we also have our continental instrument, which is the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And it has similar provisions, especially if you look at its Article 15, it has such provisions that are almost similar to the ones on the CRPD. And the African Commission on Human and People's Rights as well adopted a declaration of principles on freedom of expression and access to information in Africa. And in that declaration, the Commission actually recognizes the need to protect and to promote freedom of expression and access to information for marginalized groups and also for vulnerable groups. And those groups also the groups that face multiple forms of discrimination, and they include persons with disabilities. And it also recognizes that everyone shall have the rights to freedom of expression and access to information. And they should actually enjoy these rights without discrimination. And one of the grounds is disability. And based on this, the Commission then calls on states to then take specific measures to address the needs of these marginalized groups in a manner that guarantees them the full enjoyment of the rights of freedom of association, assembly, access to information as well. And these marginalized groups, like I've already mentioned, they include persons with disabilities. I just want to say that just looking at the area of education, like being an education institution ourselves, this has also affected us. The pandemic forced every country in the world to initiate crisis management measures. The measures that were aimed at flattening the curve and reducing the spread of the virus. And also these measures cascaded down to the education sector, and the education sector was really disrupted in a number of ways, and as various measures were being introduced in response to the pandemic. And the education sector also had to take measures, whether it's preschools or higher learning institutions or high schools. They had to pivot as well into the remote learning mode, which then was now replacing the face-to-face, which according to the protocols under this pandemic. And the pandemic has really shown us how technology can be used in learning and also contribute to improved learning outcomes. And as we were limiting physical contact, it means that the digital world is now or was now becoming what was then referred or is now being referred to as the new normal. And then remote learning, which is technology driven and facilitated by internet as well, entails actually that the learning lesson delivery system and management and development of education systems has to be assisted by technologies. And for those that are digitally connected, it became very easy to just slide into a different phase or a different mode. But you can imagine how many were left out when that transition was happening. And just to mention that this was a forced transition. And when the pandemic hit us, as our colleague has already indicated, were we ready? Generally, we were not ready. Schools were not ready. What more of even persons with disabilities that even need more facilities than the ordinary ones that we have. And this mode of learning, which uses smartphones, laptops, computers, it's gaining remarkable experience and acceptance throughout the world. But now the challenge was, how do we ensure and enable learning of persons with disabilities through technology? How do we make it inclusive enough so that we do not leave everybody, so that we don't leave anybody behind. And as our colleague has already indicated, our assistive devices that persons with disabilities actually use, which are tools of achieving or enhancing accessibility, are generally expensive. They're exorbitant and beyond the reach of many persons with disabilities. I remember last year attending a conference which was organized by the South African Human Rights Commission, and I sat next to a colleague who was visually impaired. And when he was presenting, he mentioned something about the device that he was using. It looked like just an ordinary device, but he said it cost him 50,000 Rand to actually get that device. And when we're now requiring schools to pivot to the online learning mode of system, and we have such kind of a scenario where assistive devices are that expensive. And when you look at the population of persons with disabilities, most of them are existing within the low income bracket. And how many of them are then able to then access these devices, buy them, and what are the kinds of policies that exist to also ensure that these devices are also not for the privileged? So the gadgets that have become accessible to everyone, like smartphones and all that, they might not even have the accessibility features that are required by persons with disabilities. And as a result, you see that learners with disabilities suffer digital exclusion. And in cases where alternative learning through radio or television, for those with hearing impairments and mental disabilities, they may require sign language interpretation and subtitles, but is that always provided? It's not always the case. And if these are not provided, that becomes a huge barrier and an infringement into their enjoyment of the right to education. I'm mindful of the time, by the way. So as we move forward really within this spectrum of looking at persons with disabilities in the digital age, I think it's important to really develop. We have the continental standards on human rights and global standards on human rights of persons with disabilities, but I think we need specific standards on advancing digital rights of persons with disabilities, and actually making sure that also states understand their obligation and the relevant stakeholders also understand their obligation, and also encourage public and private partnerships in the provision of these technologies, and also adopt policies for digital inclusion that take into consideration the needs of persons with disabilities, and also just encourage also promote digital literacy, among other things. And when I go back to the quotation that I started off with by this Kenyan Ephraim Washira, who said that through the computer he can now use Gmail.
I think you need to pause for a second. We have electricity problems there. Just for a second.
Okay.
Okay.
Disabilities, but for the country at large, but people living with disabilities were the hardest hit. How do we ensure that we close that gap when it comes to policy considerations and fulfilling what we say we're going to do? Maybe answer that before you start.
Give it a few seconds.
Do I finish my presentation or?
Okay, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you. I was asking if I can conclude my presentation.
Please do, please do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. These are the challenges that we face on the continent, and the availability of electricity is also one of those that affect access to internet. So I was going back to the quotation that I started with by Ephraim Washira, who said that through a computer he can now use Gmail or an SMS to communicate with his mother anytime and no longer need a teacher to make a call. And I found that to be a very powerful statement, which speaks to a number of issues. One is the issue of human dignity, the dignity of the person, just being able to use that that computer or that phone. It also enhances the dignity of the person, the autonomy of the person, the independence of the autonomy, how liberating it is for you to be able to control your life and be able to just use that device without anyone prying on you. And also it delves into the issue of the right to privacy, and the right to privacy being a fundamental right, which is also an enabler or facilitator of other rights. If one can independently use a device, that also in a way facilitate their enjoyment of the right to privacy and also control their information in a way, or secure their information. And it also empowers a person. It also contributes to their inclusion. How it was difficult, sometimes for persons with disabilities to access banks, to access markets and all that. But now, because of the digital age, people that would have otherwise not have been able to even open a bank account, now they can use mobile money, they can open a bank online, they can sell their things online, they can conduct business online, they can, inclusion socially and all that. And even interesting things such as online dating, you can actually do it online using these platforms that are available, and also set a political career also online. And I think that goes back to the statement that I read earlier about how it makes things possible for persons with disabilities. But the challenges that we face are, digital exclusion, because most of the persons with disabilities, they also exist in the low income brackets, especially for those in rural areas or informal settlements and all that. And then there's also the issue of digital illiteracy of them, persons with disabilities, but also consider someone with a child with a disability and they have to assist them. And this, the parent or the guardian might not have the knowledge to do that. Allow me just to share this, and I think it is important for me to share this screen so that it demonstrates what our colleague has been referring to. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can. Ms. Dube, I'm going to ask you if we can restart the video, if you could kindly share the audio for us. My colleagues this side just requested that we ask you to just share the audio for the video, please.
Is it okay now?
No, it's not there.
But the audio is not important for this one. I think just seeing the visuals. Apologies to also our colleagues that are visually impaired.
I have attempted to use one dating app, signed up a profile, of course, with the help of a friend, because it wasn't very accessible. But I think I hit a snag when it required me to identify see people's faces and then swipe them right if I like them, or I think swipe left if I do not like, or maybe I want to pass to the next one.
So,
my desire to study human rights.
Thank you very much for
when I was still young.
For that. I think I'm getting confused with where to stop it.
And I would watch this program, which was.
Would you like us to stop?
Okay. Yes. Thank you so much. So that video. Apologies to those that were not able to. Because you were supposed to just look at what is on the screen. The sound was not important there. So it was demonstrating some of the assistive devices that our colleague who is visually impaired here at the Center for Human Rights uses to make life possible for him as a human being, as a student, as a member of the society. So I came up with this concept to say, like, as the Center for Human Rights, how can we demonstrate to the world the possibilities of technologies? And our colleague Wilson Masharia was able to feature in this video, and I will share the link. And you'll be able to watch it later on. It actually demonstrates how he uses technologies. And so this is a person who is privileged, who has been able to collect all these devices and make them, work for him. But how about
just give us a sec. We have a problem with the power from the side. We'll let you know when the power is back. Thanks very much.
Okay. I think I'm done as well.
We're right with you, yes. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Elkins. I'm from the Internet, and I've been here all week. One of the prevailing things that seems to be broken at the moment after this one is the fact that about 40% of this country's population don't have access to the internet. Yet the cost of putting in fiber to all of the different rural areas would cost an arm and a leg. Now, one of the things that I am is an ISP, and I know that telecom charges an arm and a leg in order to get, for example, internet and a telephone line into, say, a game park or game park lodge or something. But hang on, there's an African gentleman who was born in Pretoria. He's now the richest man in the world. He's got something called Starlink, Mr. Elon Musk. He's looking for a license so that he can use Earth stations in South Africa to talk to the Starlink, this low Earth orbiting satellite network. I personally have put down something I believe in. I put down a $100 deposit on getting one of his satellite dishes so that I could use that to access internet, no matter where I am in not just South Africa, but Africa. It would cost about $100 a month to have a satellite dish in a village with full internet access. If that satellite dish was shared with, say, 50 people, then it would cost about 40-ish rand a month per household. That's something that many poor South Africans could afford. It could be done in literally 2 months, as long as the dishes could arrive. It would be great from an entrepreneur's point of view, for one clever person in one village to help run that whole village with internet. So it's something that's there, and I'm sure if we spoke nicely to Elon, he might even give us discount on this type of network. Why can't we look at doing that? Of course, this might introduce one other problem that was also mentioned briefly this morning, is that Afrinic, by the way, I was a board member for 6 years. Afrinic has literally run out of IPv4 addresses. However, we've got